So following Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh's testimony from the Senate Judiciary Committee, there were calls from a number of people, Senator Jeff Flake and others, for an FBI investigation, which ended up actually happening, to do an additional FBI background check. What were your thoughts on the wisdom of that, and then with the conclusions that they came to?
Well, in a sense, it resulted as what we suspected, that everyone knew. Let me start over. To the degree it resulted in the outcome that it did, well, of course, in retrospect, it looked okay. But everyone should have known that the FBI was going to find nothing, because most of the witnesses that they had to interview had said that nothing happened here. And those who alleged something happened either weren't credible or their stories didn't check out. So there really wasn't much for the FBI to do. It should have been done earlier, but it helped secure some additional votes and reassure some of the fence-sitting senators on the Republican side that they could vote for Judge Kavanaugh, and it resulted in his confirmation. But you know, the FBI investigation wasn't needed. That hearing where Judge Kavanaugh was maligned by the left and the Democrats on the Senate side of the Judiciary Committee wasn't needed. So this was an abusive delay of the process. Thankfully, he was finally put on the court, but those 2 or 3 weeks were a disgrace.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about the accountability that's needed in this situation to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Similar things have happened in the past. Some would say with Robert Bork, with Clarence Thomas, and so there is sort of a history of efforts like this taking place. Now, you mentioned that Judicial Watch is going to try and do what it can to make sure things like this don't happen. The ethics complaint against Cory Booker, what else is there that you think that Judicial Watch can do to hold the Senate accountable, to hold these people accountable, to make sure that the process doesn't continue to escalate and continue to spiral out of control like this?
Well, there may be other ethics complaints that we can file. The lawyers involved that committed misconduct, they could be subject to sanction by the bars, so we'll take a look at that. The bars are essentially the legal profession itself. And we can ask questions of the Justice Department and the FBI about how they handled the Kavanaugh nomination, in the sense of finding evidence showing that there were folks lying about Judge Kavanaugh, and that they have information like that. We'd be interested in finding that out. And there could be additional, as I said, ethics complaints against some of the senators who abused their offices to target Judge Kavanaugh. Look, you know, Senator Feinstein was in the IRS, or the Justice Department, and she went after Kavanaugh like she did, and had information and then released it in a way to destroy him, as opposed to advance the rule of law or regular government functions. There'd be no doubt what would happen to her. She'd be subject to investigation and a whole lot worse, potentially, in terms of prosecution. It's only because these folks are senators is it hard to enforce the rule of law against them. That's why over the long term it's important that we have the Freedom of Information Act apply to Congress. We get a more hardcore ethics process, because right now if you file a complaint with the Ethics Committee, it's split in half in the Senate, half Democrats, half Republicans, which is a recipe for doing nothing. So we got to really put pressure on the Senate to enforce their rules now, but come up with a better process to enforce them in the future too.
And when it comes to the way that you know, the protests took place, and there were other sort of things that took place, someone actually ended up getting arrested and charged for doxing, which is releasing public information on U.S. senators in the midst of the confirmation process. So besides the actual physical protests that were taking place, there was doxing taking place. There were things like this, threats being made to various senators' offices, to various people's families. I mean, so we're looking at a situation here where, you know, not only was the process itself by the people in charge, the Senate Judiciary, Senate Democrats, handled poorly, but also by the protesters and by other people. So what do you think can be done in that regard?
Well, we have to call them out for what they did. These weren't protests. These were violent actions designed to overthrow our republic, in this case the Senate. They don't want to follow the rules. They wanted to have mob rule. Thankfully the Senate resisted it, but it was a close thing, as I said. And that can't be tolerated. You saw them attacking, literally, the building of the Supreme Court the other day, clawing at its doors, and being encouraged by other senators in the current Senate in this lawlessness. You have senators being confronted and assaulted and threatened with the most heinous and vile threats. And these are not individual threats, and you can't say anything, you can't say it was just a one-off threat. Look, you had organized intimidation activities targeted at the Senate. And if you want that to happen, that way lies ruin for our Republican form of government. And we've got to stand strong against it.
So as we move forward here, I mean, it's very possible that President Trump's going to get another Supreme Court pick. He might get 2 more. I mean, who knows? Obviously, the process needs to be reformed. We're doing work to try to hold people accountable. As we wrap up here, what sort of likelihood do you see of this process changing? Do you see this as fixable, or do you see that Senate Democrats and the left might continue to escalate and continue to go down this path?
On the one hand, it's very concerning that the left is designed as now trying to blow up the system. But it does show that they see themselves losing. I know sometimes conservatives think that things are a nightmare here. But the left doesn't want to play by the rules anymore because the rules aren't working for them anymore, because they perceive conservatives to be winning on policy and certainly on the key issue of the judiciary. So in many ways, it's a positive thing, if I can look at the silver lining. So we just have to keep on winning in terms of advocating for putting strict constructionists, lawyers and judges who will apply the law rather than make it up as they go along. That's one way to protect the system over the long term. And of course, the Senate needs to just stand fast against this. And I just hope some Democrats, put their thinking caps back on and become more reasonable here, rather than letting the mob run the show over there. Because this is over the long run will destroy both parties if they let this violence get out of control, as what happened during the Kavanaugh hearings.